These questions are designed to unfold and explain your teachings, and are asked in the context of the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, which reflect the ancient wisdom. First question. Ramana Maharshi proposed the fundamental question, who am I? Who are you?
No difference. I have a certain personality, I have a certain background that gives a personal flavor to the format of the teaching.
Okay. Many Western seekers are looking for enlightenment as if it is an experience. What is enlightenment?
The complete marriage between the absolute and the relative. The end of the idea of personal doership is a definition that Ramesh gives, and I like this definition very much. Because it implies the end of every kind of personal flavor to the purity of the Advaita teaching. As I said, there is a personality, and there's also a personal flavor. There is also a personal way of transmitting the teaching of, I call it, the inner network of different aspects of the teaching. Advaita is the essence, I call it the essence of everything. The essence of the teaching is the purity of the core of the teaching, but it is not the whole teaching, of course. The variety of being is so great that there are so many different aspects and different forms might also focus on different aspects of the teachings, or give different entrance gates to the same essence, to the same core. And of course, my form is not Indian, so there is Western blood flowing through my organism.
Is it German blood? I don't actually know if you're German or American, actually.
It is German and English.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. But you've mostly lived in Germany?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
My family was half English.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Mm.
But I mean, I feel very, I feel I have access to the Western collective and to the Western mysticism, and I feel very much, naturally linked with what I call the Western stream of wisdom. I mean, of course, in its essence, how can there be difference between Advaita and Christian mysticism? So, of course, I was kind of introduced, and I was also I'm very thankful to the Indian stream of knowledge. And yet, in this unfoldment, I got more and more access also to the Western tradition, this kind of the natural lineage of this organism, the lineage this organism was brought up in, you know?
Right, right. I think you published a book about Meister Eckhart.
No, I didn't publish a book on him yet, but I definitely am very much in touch with him, and I also quote him in talks, or, you know.
Right.
Germany has a strong, in the Middle Age, Germany had a very strong mystic core in the Christian, within the Christian mainstream. So of course, when I was younger, you know, I was kind of like most people, rebellious against everything that had to do with Christianity and with Jesus. And this has completely changed.
So do you feel that you bring Jesus into your teachings?
Well, not the person of Jesus, but definitely what Jesus stands for, and I definitely also work with the Bible.
Right.
And I'm very close to different Christian mystics. So I see my figure more like a, you know, like a melting pot between where actually this Eastern lineage and the Western lineage meet and create something completely new, which is not new at all, but new maybe in its form.
I think that's very interesting. Yeah. Are there any qualifications for enlightenment? Is practice necessary? And if yes, what form do you suggest?
I have a very sober and I would say even internally scientific view, because I don't see any difference between mysticism and what I call inner science. So what history taught us is that there are very rare cases of people where, for example, through accidents, through shocks, through different very extreme situations, this, what we call enlightenment, this final realization of being happened. However, you know, nobody has the, nobody can wait for such thing to happen. I mean, I myself had, so I could say that, you know, grace happened through an accident. I didn't have, you know, a realized teacher. This accident evoked a state of clinical death. And so I could say death was my first teacher, and this was such a major shock for the whole system that it actually wiped out everything. So, of course, you know, if the personal will tries to imitate that and says, okay, I'm going to drive against an oak tree like you did, maybe the result will be solely injury and more suffering rather than enlightenment. So this is nothing that the eye
it's
can
not
do.
a practice that you would suggest.
I wouldn't suggest this practice.
You have some milder practices, maybe.
It's not a practice we can rely on,
right.
you know.
Right.
So one state of clinical death among thousands or a million could maybe evoke this no state of mind. But I definitely suggest the path of sadhana. You know, I'm saying to people that do whatever has to be done, and do the work that has to be done. I might call it the homework. Everybody has to do his homework. And you know, Papaji said the same. Or no, I think it was Ramana who once said that, you know, that the people who don't have to do the work in this lifetime, that they had already done it in other times. However, everybody has to do his work.
Mm.
So Western sadhana, I call it inner work. And there is no absolute definition to what has to be done. The work I do with people relies on experience, own experience and own understanding of the functioning of what gives people, what is responsible in people for illusion. And this is definitely the mind. So it makes sense to trace, you know, the mind, and to see who is this mind, what we call mind. You know, so this is definitely also what I call a Western contribution to the to wisdom in general. And the knowledge of the mind, and especially the knowledge on the subconsciousness, is, to my understanding, for Western people, much more important than for Eastern, you know, students.
I spent some time with Osho, and they had a very full-on program of groups doing this kind of inner work. But actually, for Indian people, Osho used to say, "Oh, you don't need to do that."
Yes.
And Papaji was much more saying, well, do self-inquiry, ask yourself this question, who am I? Ask it once, ask it right, and then you're free. So somehow there was not any suggestion towards Indian people anyway that they would need to do this practice.
Well, Nisargadatta, for example, said, you know, that in order to give an answer to this question, who am I, you should first answer the question, who am I not?
Right.
So definitely without a full understanding of who am I not, who I'm not,
Right.
how can this question, who am I, be finally answered? Ramana was also brought up in the Indian stream, not in the Western stream. And I see many people who, Westerners of course, who go to India and who get certain insights on Advaita on certain levels, but the insights are definitely limited. The knowledge of the mind is, to my understanding, a very important contribution to this, to the unfoldment of the whole for Westerners.
Right, right. I mean, recently I've become personally interested in the Enneagram, and I advertise it as know who you're not. So and somehow it fits, for me it's been fitting more and more with what you're just saying. Maybe you could say something about the Enneagram, because I think you also use the Enneagram.
Well, the Enneagram is definitely presenting valuable answers or valuable insights on the subconsciousness and on the whole structure of mind that you're not. The adoption of the mind is put together by, you know, by history, and the mind has, of course, collective roots. The mind is not as personal as it seems. I mean, the whole idea of an I is not as personal as it seems. But the Enneagram also shows kind of, you know, the natural qualities of this being. And these natural qualities differ. They're not every being has the same natural qualities. Let's say the diamond, the light that is you know, shining on this diamond is being reflected in different ways. So with one person it might seem more greenish, and with another person might seem more yellowish. So these are different, you know, different virtues, different qualities, essential qualities. Of course, from an absolute point of view, this is still what you're not. But I think some Advaita teachers call this level the primary illusion. You know, it's like the Lila itself, God's play, has natural ways of appearances that show up when the mind, the false I, is getting out of the way. So, for example, the archetype of the holy, which might shine through in a natural way through different organisms, will never be the same as, you know, the archetype of the hero or the philosopher. So this organism is working in a different archetypical way than your organism, for example. You know, and of course the problem with the idea of enlightenment is that people have certain ideas of how enlightenment shows. And of course Westerners, you know, when we look at the collective coloring of the idea of enlightenment, Westerners have, of course, in their minds, the archetype of the holy. And in Christian mysticism, this is a very important archetype that has been manifesting. And then they link certain attributes to this archetype of the holy. But enlightenment is much more, you know, undefinable. It cannot be, it's unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that in choosing this project, you know, to go and interview, and now I've interviewed about 20, I would call them awakened people. And of course, everyone has a different flavor from the other. There's no archetypal enlightened person that I could even suggest to somebody.
Yes, I'm just saying that, of course, people have, of course, an idea about this concept, and it's good and valuable to look into the collective coloring that happens. And I'm saying to Westerners, no matter whether you define yourself to be Christian or not, you're Christian anyway. You know, you left the church, it doesn't matter. Your mind has at least 2,000 years of Christian coloring behind it. So this is really what the power of misunderstanding is about. You know, it's not about one personal life. It has been accumulated through thousands of years, and people underestimate, of course, the power of this collective history.
Yeah, I mean, as you speak, I can also see inside the effect. You know that I went, I don't know, 30 years ago to India, and now somehow I'm a messenger for the Indian Advaita. But actually, when you start to speak about you know, the mysticism of the West, I can also see inside there is this part which hasn't been given much space, actually.
Yes, yes.
So actually what you're saying is touching me personally. It's very nice.
You know, this access to the Western collective roots, in my case, happened quite naturally. I wasn't, I mean, there is no concept of, you know, what comes to me or what has to come to me, what shouldn't come to me. And I think this is you know, the present of a Western teacher is that a Western teacher can teach Western people much better than anybody else. I think that some Indian teachers, they don't, from an absolute point of view, it's all the same. But in the teaching, it's not only about the absolute. It's about, you know, what I call the marriage between the absolute and the relative. So Advaita is not really interested in that. But I am more and more. And an Indian form of an Advaita teacher cannot teach Western people in the same way as a Western form. This is quite natural. I would never say that I could teach Indian people in the same way an Indian teacher could. You know, but some Indian teachers, they don't see this limit on the relative level.
Although having said that, it seems that Papaji had a tremendous influence on many Western people who since have become teachers. So I guess, you know, the biggest nursery for the present Western teachers has come through this influence from Papaji, who is, of course, Indian.
This is right. I mean, the difference in the modern age between the, you know, when we look at the reality of the spiritual Eastern collective and the spiritual Western collective is definitely that what I call the, you know, the invisible spiritual matrix is still more vivid and sane and visible in the Eastern Hemisphere. It has been very much destroyed in our hemisphere. So this is definitely a great advantage in Eastern cultures, and India is, in a very specific way, I mean, kind of the cradle of spirituality on earth. So India is something special. It's not just one country. So it's a source. I mean, you know, it's.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel it like that. Just to spend time on the land there, something happened somehow.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying. That's why it's natural that, you know, the major impulses, they come from India to Europe, to the States, to Australia, and the Western world in general, and not vice versa. Although this doesn't mean that the Indian collective could not learn, of course, from what I called the Western contribution, which is very valuable also, you know? Because of course the minds of what Indian people, they work different, but it doesn't mean that the knowledge about the mind is completely unnecessary for anybody, for everybody.
Yeah, about a year ago, an Indian book publisher wanted to organize a tour through India where I would give meetings to the middle class. I was completely shocked because I thought, well, why would they come and listen to somebody like me? And he said, well, actually, the middle class have lost roots also with this collective in India.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So they have become quite like Western people in a way.
Yes. I mean, this is something that we can observe, you know, the whole world of the modern age, that the whole world is becoming more and more westernized. This is a stream that does not come from spirituality directly. It comes from a mundane level. It comes from economy. This is like an overlayer of the whole loss of spirituality that has been transferred into economy and
technological thing, materialism.
Materialism, actually, yes. But what I just said recently in an interview is that this whole, let's call it materialization, although this is not quite the right term, but this stream of materialism that kind of starts, covering the whole world. This is, in a concealed way, interesting to see that this is again Christianism trying to
propagate
itself, take over. I mean, it's interesting to see these forces because, of course, the United States are a big, have a large
impact
on the whole, on this stream. And of course, I mean, as you know, the government of the United States is very much penetrated by fundamental Christian powers. So it's interesting to see how Christianity, through this, let's say, deviation, finds another way to, to cover the world and to work as missionaries in a very different way. I think most people are not even aware of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ramana said self-inquiry is the most direct route to realizing the self. What do you say about self-inquiry and how to conduct self-inquiry?
The concept I use, I differentiate between what I call small self-inquiry and great self-inquiry. Ramana's self-inquiry in its core is what I call the great self-inquiry. The inner work, the Western sadhana, which is necessary to penetrate illusions of mind, and to allow every subconsciousness to actually surface into consciousness. This is what I call small self-inquiry. So you could say small inquiry is definitely the inquiry into what you're not. Call it the preparation. Call it unveiling, so that, you know, the sky is clear, and this question, who am I, has no limits and can just pop up and unfold into wholeness, into everything. It doesn't, you know, hit any limits. Every subconscious layer of mind is a limit. And sometimes, as I said at the beginning, you know, in very rare cases, it is definitely possible that this question just penetrates every layer of illusion, of dust that has settled internally, and goes right through everything. So yes, so this finally leads to a contradictory approach, because, let me explain, while I, you know, do the work, whatever the sadhana is, while I work on something that is not, it doesn't mean that, you know, in the next moment I shouldn't postpone the question, who am I? I mean, I'm open for this question in any moment, any given moment. And at the same time, you know, I do my work. So this is a contradictory approach. Because people understand, many people who have gotten in touch with Advaita, they have not realized what I call, you know, the paradox path, and they still believe that this is this is a contradiction in itself. This does not go together.
Yeah, I mean, somehow now that we've been talking for some time, I can start to get a sense for your approach. But having spent a long time with Papaji, he somehow hardly ever would go into what you're calling, you know, the inner work or the illusion. Yeah? His whole thing was always just to cut right through that. And somehow he had enough energy or perception or power, I'm not quite sure exactly how it worked, grace maybe is the right word, that he was really successful for that.
Well, you know, I have to say, after having observed people and even teachers who came from Papaji for years after this happened, I can say that Papaji was a great and extreme door opener. But I can tell you that people who couldn't find the mind while sitting in the living room in Lucknow in 1992, I can assure you that the mind stroked back. And great openings where people thought this is enlightenment happened. But this was not necessarily the total destruction of the power of mind as a separate entity. This was not the complete understanding of mind or the destruction of subconsciousness. This was a great opening that lasted for a while, but which was still limited. And I can say that, Andrew Cohen went through a disillusionment, but he, of course, drew the false conclusions. But it is definitely true that Papaji had, through Papaji, this power came. It is definitely not true, to my observation, that this was final enlightenment for many people. There was a time and a space where great openings happened. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going for great openings anymore, really. I realize that you have to cook with water, if you know what I mean. There are some rare times and spaces where you can cook with champagne, but actually you have to cook with water. And to really trace, as I said, the mind, you really need certain qualities like discipline, certain radical qualities that this organism has to learn. Because otherwise, great openings of the sky will only be temporary. And so many people thought, wow, this is it. Yes, there is no mind, And then, the mind is, I compare the mind with radioactivity. It is not visible. You cannot feel it, you cannot grasp it. Where is it? Of course, when you look at it, it's gone, But where does it come back from? It's strange that it suddenly kind of sneaks back, It comes from nowhere. And I have observed this in many, many cases and for many years, and people have a naive, they underestimate the mind,
I would say that in a way what you're talking about now is one of the keys, that many people have a large opening, a glimpse, but after going back to their family or back to their work situation, just back to living in the West maybe, or even coming out of a satsang weekend intensive in the West and going home, or after a few days, as you say, the mind just creeps back somehow.
It could be after a few days, it could be after a few weeks, it could be after a few years. What I'm saying is only that, that the knowledge of the mind is like a fundament. And so when this opening happens, if there is not the inner wisdom about this and the inner maturity, then it's as if this vessel cannot, is not prepared for this. So the mind is kind of obliged to strike back.
And your approach for preparing the vessel is what you call the inner work.
Well, I tell people, you have to know your opponent. Mm. If you don't know your opponent, the fight might be over for a while, but you don't know from where the opponent comes back. And never underestimate your opponent. The mind is much stronger and much powerful than you can grasp. And the mind hides behind masks of enlightenment behind, the mind hides behind masks of the holy. The mind can imitate every kind of knowledge or wisdom. So, you know, what kind of opponent is this? Just, I tell people, just imagine, you know, that this mind is having billions of people, is owning billions of people, you know? So you have to have the respect and, as I say, certain qualities, and finally knowledge of this power, so that this mind can really become an ally and can integrate itself into what Ramesh calls the body-mind organism, you know, as a servant of everything. But the mind, to begin with, never wants to be a servant. The mind wants to take over power, wants to sit on the throne. So of course the tendency will be, if you have, you know, a large opening, then the mind will come and say, it's mine. My, you know, my enlightenment, my opening, and let me do something with it now. Let me be a great teacher, or let me tell people where, you know, how it goes.
Okay. When Ramana was asked, when will the realization of the self be gained, he replied, when the world, which is what is seen, has been removed, there will be realization of the self, which is the seer. What is the true understanding of the world, and how to remove the world?
Well, what Ramana meant when he used the term world, he meant the mind, because the world and the mind, to begin with, are just two words for the same. When the mind is removed, the world collapses, and the fall into the absolute, which is also the fall into the unknown, happens naturally. Then the world comes back, which is not the mind, because of course there is also something that we can call world, which is not the mind, you know, which is what I called at the beginning the primary illusion, not the secondary illusion, which is the suchness of a tree, the suchness of everything that appears. And there is no suffering in the suchness of whatever is. The mind has to be removed, and to quote again Ramesh, because I like this definition, the complete sense of personal doership, which is always the consequence of the I thought claiming to be the doer or the thinker, or, you know.
It has been suggested that the mind must be destroyed for liberation to occur. Do you have a mind? How to destroy the mind?
Well, yes, of course I have a mind. I mean, this, you know, there is definitely a misunderstanding about the destruction of mind. Of course, you know, I have discussions with, you know, Western philosophers or psychologists, and then they say, you know, but this is ridiculous with destruction of the mind. You couldn't function without a mind. I mean, if somebody called you by your name and you wouldn't, had absolutely no relationship with this name, how would this work? So there is a grain of truth in this, and of course there's also misunderstanding and arrogance in this idea of some psychologists. But the grain of truth is that, of course, the mind cannot be destroyed in its essence. The mind can be destroyed and has to be destroyed in its, let's call it, overlayer. This idea of being a separate entity that has the power to do something separately, to affect the world, other people, or itself as a separate entity. So this is kind of the result of a split within the mind. When this original split merges, the mind doesn't reflect itself anymore. The mind is just a servant within unity, or within, in even better words, Advaita. The mind is responsible. Ramesh calls it the working mind. This is also a very important differentiation, which makes clear that the mind has not to be destroyed. Thinking mind has to be destroyed. The working mind is not only important, it is absolutely essential for this body-mind organism to work. When the working mind is dead, this organism is dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So of course I have a mind, but I don't have a personal mind that has the idea of being personal, of being separate, of being somebody. But this organism definitely needs a mind. And the mind is great. I mean, the essence of mind is pure intelligence.
I was just going to say that every single meeting of these interviews has been somehow particular. So, for example, you mentioned Ramesh several times. I've interviewed him for the Indian book. But there's one Indian man called Jahr. I don't know if you've heard of Jahr.
Yes, I've heard of him. He once gave an interview in What is Enlightenment?
That's right, with Andrew Cohen. Yeah. So we've been visiting him for the last 4 years and having satsangs with him every year. He just left his body just a couple of months ago when he was just over 90. And we were there maybe 10 days before he left his body. We had 2 big meetings with him. And everybody could sense that here was an extraordinary person who was almost not a person. What was left of the personal seemed to be so little that he was barely, it felt like there was this pure vessel or something. It was quite extraordinary. And the people who lived around him, a small group who lived around him, they told us that if, for example, when the Iraqi war started, for example, he would disappear into his bathroom for 3 or 4 days, and it felt like, in a sense, his organism was taken over by the energies of the planet or something like this. I can't explain it very well. But out of all these people I met, I would have to say that here was somebody hardly present, hardly personal.
I know what you mean, although I see it a little bit differently. I see another aspect, you know, when this body ages, it goes in a way through a process of dematerialization. And my body went through this process after the accident. No, well, through the accident. And then after the accident, went through a process of rematerialization. Now my body feels quite, I mean, there is Shakti, there is, you know, it is not, the body itself is not transparent at all. But when the body ages, there is like a natural, everything becomes more subtle. The face of death shines through, but not as a horror mask, but in its subtlety and its shining, subtle love energy, you know?
Yeah, I think that was very much there when we met recently.
Because this is the same what people meet when they meet the form of Ramesh, you know? Although the same shining through, very subtle, it's almost as if you could see through the skin into the bones, you know? But this organism here is in a different, definitely different state. So there is, in a sense, more personality, more, you know.
What about the tendencies of the mind? Must these be removed before self-realization can become permanent? How to remove the tendencies?
Well, you know, in a sense, I already answered this question. This linear understanding that, you know, first there is preparation, then there is maturity, and then enlightenment can happen. This is an understanding of linear thinking which is just not true. It's too one-dimensional. Therefore, I said we have to deal with a paradox approach. And this means that I could, you know, explain it this way. Do the work on the latent tendencies of mind. Do the work, the prayers, whatever the meditation, whatever has to be done. And in the same moment, be open to realize truth. You know, while you deal with untruth, be open to realize truth, to realize the absolute. And this is the same way I work with people. I mean, I do, in a sense, contradictory acts, you know, because in the meetings, which I call darshans, of course, these meetings are directly and pointing to the absolute. But at the same time, you know, I work with people. I mean, I founded a school 10 years ago called the Mystery School, where I work with people on using metaphysical wisdom of the ages, secret knowledge and not secret knowledge, where we do sadhana on the different levels of this organism, physically, emotionally, and mentally, you know? And this is really in what I call the integrated approach that refers to every level in the relative and, of course, to the absolute. So it's not that simple, you know, that of course, the misunderstanding is, some people say we have to prepare ourselves and it's going to happen in the future when I'm mature enough. Other people who have the same linear thinking, but just on the opposite way, who have misunderstood Advaita, claim every preparation is senseless, don't do anything, don't do your work, just sit there and know who you are. So this is just the opposite direction of the same linear misunderstanding, and not the full realization of a paradoxity that cannot be solved with the thinking mind. You know?
Yeah, I like that very much. Are there any stages of enlightenment? What are these? How to attain each stage?
You know, stages, talking about stages of enlightenment or concepts of mind. How can there be stages of enlightenment? Of course, there can be stages of insights, which we could call relative insights, temporary insights, which happen on the inner path. But I would not call these levels of enlightenment, you know. I would call these insights or glimpses or relative openings, but enlightenment is enlightenment. This is a term, you know, that has been diluted by talking about it too much. So this concept of stages has in itself the danger of, again, of, you know, finding linear ways to truth, which is also a typical masculine idea, you know, of a mind that has lost its female roots, which is, by the way, I mean, this is a general illness of the Western mind, you see, that has to do with the Christian patriarchs that have been coloring the whole Christian teaching. So this is a general illness, not only in men, but also in Western women. You know, the thinking process is masculine, you know. So my answer is no. You know, there are no stages of enlightenment. There is enlightenment, and there are relative insights, which are not founded on final realization, final knowledge. And of course, I know that for people, of course, how can they differentiate? You know, you can only see what is within my level of understanding. What I like is I like the stages that are being shown in the 10 pictures of riding the ox, for example, you know, because this is a very brilliant way that has been maturing in hundreds of years of showing, thousands of years of showing really the stages of the path that happen naturally. We can just observe by experiencing, and this is a scientific approach again, you know. We can just observe how they happen naturally. But the mind, again, wants to make a concept out of this, you know, and wants to know what is step 2 behind step 1 on my way to enlightenment. And this is a great disillusionment, of course, that these predictable steps, you know, they don't work. Because I finally have to admit that I don't know what will be step 2, you know. But I can definitely rely a teacher who has the final understanding, who does not have a rigid concept, step 1, step 2, step 3, stage 3.
Very nice. Yeah. It appears essential to meet a master and surrender to that master. Who is the master? What is the master's role? And how to recognize a true master?
Well, these were many questions in one. How to realize a true master? There is a disappointing answer to this question, and that is that finally people cannot. Because, as I said before, you know, you cannot really realize something which is nothing, that is beyond your capacity of perception. But also, this is not an absolute answer, of course. Because even though people are possessed by layers of mind, there is the capacity of, you know, that this power for unknown reasons, you know, penetrates through and goes directly into the heart of a being. And there is, beyond mind, a knowledge, a realization that this is a master. Although there is a mind, and then, although resistance and the whole, you know, scenario is going to happen, and maybe they're even going to lose this this moment of knowing, while they then will be with this master. However, when people stay true, learn to stay true to themselves, learn to listen to their hearts and to the voice of the heart, listen to differentiate what is the voice of the heart and what is the voice of the false mind. Then, by being with this master, they start, you know, either falling deeper into this true relationship with themselves, because the master is the self, or they start realizing limitations in the teachings. They start realizing that, you know, the teaching is not pure. There are some ways of coloring or imitations of teachings as spiritual concepts. It's very difficult, you know. Masters can use the same words. They can use Advaita knowledge, but people cannot differentiate by the words. And they can also not differentiate by actions of the masters. This is something, you know, where I'm saying, for example, Andrew Cohen, he wrote this book, I think, together also with Ken Wilber. I don't know what the English version is, but it's about trying to find, you know, the integrity of spiritual masters. It gives certain rules, for example, you know. And what I'm saying is this is really a very simplistic idea to judge masters by their actions. It's not so simple. We cannot see the mind by actions. The mind can imitate everything, everything. So really what we need is complete introspection and a very silent inner listening. Then we might have glimpses of a true master. But the mind cannot differentiate. The mind cannot really know. I mean, you know, true masters, Zen masters, the Zen tradition is a much more rough tradition than the Advaita tradition. I mean, Indian masters usually have very, not all, but have often very soft personalities, because the Indian collective is more like a soft and smooth and female collective. But you know, the Zen tradition is much more rough, much more rough. And there have been masters who have been doing very, very strange, extreme, and let's even say violent things. You know, which a moralistic mind would never call love. Never call love. You know, there's this very known short Zen story where, you know, where the Zen master cut off the tip of the small finger of the student, and in that moment he was enlightened.
You'll find a story in this Papaji book where somebody called Satya was apparently hit by Papaji, and this little episode is described in this book. And she went into a space for many weeks after that where there was nothing happening in her mind. But when you read about it, it sounds totally shocking that, you know, he would come and hit this 50-year-old lady.
Yes, and this is still relatively harmless. I mean, when you read about stories of Zen masters, I mean, apparently people have died, you know. These are all legends, but as you know, in the legend there is always also a grain of truth.
What is the master's role?
The master is a guide and a corrective, and also a catalyst. It is true that, you know, of course, it's from an absolute point of view, it's true anyway, that people don't need personal masters, or don't need the master in a personal form, because everything can be a master, can be the master, internally or externally. But when I say the master is also, the personal master is a catalyst, I'm saying that, yes, processes might need hundreds of years, and, you know, with the proximity of a personal master, this time is suddenly melting. Hundreds of years can melt into a few years, or finally even into no time. think it was a nice idea of Krishnamurti, you know, to teach people to focus on the inner authority and to focus on actually the inner teacher. And there are quite a few, especially American teachers, who are on this line, you know. And what I can reply to this idea is, it's a nice idea, but it's not in relationship with the observation, with the natural scientific observation of generations of seekers. It's a nice idea, but it's an idealistic idea. It's a concept that is not in touch really with reality and with observing reality. Fact is that being with the Master in personal form is the most radical, the most clear, and the most obvious way of approaching truth internally. And it's the way that works. You know, everything else doesn't really work for, I would say, at least 99% of the people.
Traditionally, devotees had tremendous devotion to the Master. Please say something about devotion in the pursuit of awakening.
I think devotion is very difficult for Westerners. It's not really part of their horizon. It's not part of what the mind has learned, really. You know, and devotion is not going together with the collective results of the age of enlightenment that our collective has gone through. Because the fruit of the age of enlightenment is the free will. And devotion does not merge. The concept of devotion does not really merge with the idea of the free will. And with the, you know, with the idea of was this trinity from the, you know, from the French Revolution, is fraternité, égalité, and liberté, I think. Is it right?
I don't know, actually. Right? It sounds good.
Sounds good.
You've got good French.
Fraternité, égalité, and liberté, no? So this is, you know, leading people to the concept of human dignity. But of course, there is the misunderstanding or the confusion between human dignity and the own will that lives in a concept of self-assertion, you know? And this is, of course, the power of the ego. And so there is definitely a major conflict on a collective level. It's not only on the personal, it's on the collective already. So it is hard for Westerners to really learn about devotion, because devotion, of course, implies that there is definitely something higher than the ownership of an I, something even higher than human dignity. And that this, what is higher, can show even through a personal form. This is not part of the, absolutely not part of the concept of Western seekers. Yes, of course, Jesus Christ, 2,000 years ago, it happened for once, you know. But after that, as you know, the Christian collective is still waiting for a new I think to learn about devotion, we have to learn from the East. I was always very touched by the devotion of Indian people, natural devotion, which does not require inner effort, you know. But for Westerners, it needs effort, and sometimes, to tell you the truth, it also needs a sense of inner humiliation until they bow their heads. When I say this, you can already imagine, you know, the suspicion, hearing this, the suspicion of the Western mind, who's always looking for potential abuse, and you know, just listen to these words with the ears of doubt and mistrust, and you know.
I think Jesus said something like, "The humble will inherit the kingdom of God," or something like this, or to inherit the kingdom of God, one needs to be humble. I'm not quite sure how it was really said.
Yes.
And so it touches on this devotion. In your own teaching, for example, do you have some way to go into this aspect?
Different aspects, you know. I teach some sacred movements in the mystery school, which have the power in themselves they touch this aspect of devotion in people. These are very, very slow movements that are in touch with devotional postures.
Are these something you've learned from Gurdjieff, or?
Well, you know, I have had, but this is too long a story. I have had different teachers before the accident. I had a teacher, a Sufi teacher before. I wouldn't call him enlightened, but definitely a mystic. And the core of these movements came from him, but it's from tradition, of course. But of course, I added, well, in a natural way, you know, they were modified, some of them. So this is a way. But you know, the most powerful, direct way that naturally points to this aspect also is that you tell people the truth, and that you don't tolerate untruth. In certain moments, telling people the truth is sometimes humiliating. I don't need the personal intention to humiliate people. It's just the emanation of that, which humiliates the mind in a way that the mind in that moment has to confess that, this was a lie, this was an illusion, this is just made up story, even if it sounded spiritual or good or awakened or whatever. So this is a moment of humiliation, and a moment of humiliation is not a moment of suffering. It has in itself the potential for devotion. So someone who sees that, who takes the stroke, gets the flavor of devotion. Another person who only uses this moment for protecting himself, for retreating back into the fortress, doesn't harvest the fruits of devotion. And devotion leads into love, and love melts everything.
Seekers often have curious ideas about the enlightened state. Please describe your typical day and how you perceive the world.
Well, the typical day, I would say, is of absolutely no difference. A typical day is an ordinary day, just like every day. Enlightenment has, of course, nothing to do with the outside world and nothing to do with appearance. The perception, though, of course, is very different. The perception is, I could describe it in a way that everything emanates from a deep inner silence. The activities on the periphery of the world don't have the power to meddle with this silence or to get involved in this core. There is no more possibility to, for involvement on the surface. This doesn't mean that I cannot get angry. It doesn't mean that I cannot, show all kinds of natural human states of being touched, or even being excited, or so. But still, there is a deep, never-ending awareness of eternal silence, in which the world is happening. And there is never anymore the connection between the seer and the I thought. So this is what I pointed to Gangachi in one of my letters. I said to her, the I thought is uprooted. It's as if, you take the weed, pull it out of the ground, and you know, there is no more life, blood following, because it's uprooted, you know. And this is a major experience. It doesn't mean that, you know, that the mind has no more negativity, that the mind will always have negativity, even in the most supreme states, which are temporary, you know, because enlightenment is no state. So how can anything that manifests have no negativity? I mean, this is the manifestation in itself is a polar world, you know. So this idea of overcoming negativity is in itself, it's a confusion. What is much more important than overcoming negativity is the own relation to negativity. This is what I call the, you know, the weed is uprooted, and then the mind is still producing some negative thoughts in different moments, which will then simply burn. Well, they will burn. Everything burns in consciousness. But there is no personal relationship with it any longer. So just let the, you know, let the clouds that come just pass. There is nothing you can do. There is nothing you can do. You know, don't try to be good or even better.
So the last question, you've given us a profound discourse on awakening.
I don't know whether it was profound.
Well, I think it was profound. Personally, I found it profound. When you would meet someone with a passion for awakening, what would your short advice be?
You know, my advice, or my being with this person would definitely relate on the level of this passion. And in other words, how hot is this fire, and how hot are you willing to let it be? So I never give people the same advice, you know. The advice is only a reflection of the desire of the person sitting in front of me. If someone wants to have, you know, an advice on the relationship, on his girlfriend, I might give it on this level, or I might just say, I don't know, and it's not interesting. But still I can say that, you know, if the fire is really, really present, then it is going to be mirrored back in a different way. In other words, I might seem more passionate if the input is passionate. I might seem passionate. If the input is not passionate, I might not be interested. This is not because I have a certain concept of how to behave. This is just the natural way of how something is reflected.
Is there anything you'd like to add we didn't come to?
Well, I think most people are not interested.
I would have to agree with you, of course.
But of course, also many seekers are not interested. You know, it is. I just remember Gangaji, who once said, you know, her experience that she never knew some people. You would never have thought, you know, that suddenly, you know, they have breakthroughs, and other people, you know, that, well, I have to say, in some way, pretend to be very, you know, consequent and practicing and meditating hours a day and doing all kinds of things, having already met so many teachers, have read so many books, have a lot of knowledge, which is not knowledge from, which is not inner knowledge, which is just accumulated knowledge, and you know, they are with you, but you sense that they're deep underneath, that there is a rock and a stagnation, and nothing really happens, you know. But it is really, again, just another sign for the unknown. You can never know. You can never know. But generally, I have to say that there is little interest, finally, even among this so-called Satsang movement. I was never a friend of this movement, you know, this diluted movement. And it has already, I mean, it's gone down. The number of people who visit these meetings has gone down a lot. And that's good, of course, you know. But really, people who are really interested, they're also open to do the work. They're just open to do the work. And however, I say to people, it doesn't matter what we do together, you know, we could also drink coffee, but, you know, if we drink coffee, then we really drink coffee. I mean, in full and total presence of everything.
Well, I would conclude with the observation that somehow we have really done this interview, it feels like.
Okay.
So I really thank you for that.
Good.
It's very profound, very beautiful. And it's very beautiful for me personally to meet you in this way.
The question we're facing is enlightenment sudden, you know, or is it a path? I mean, how can this question be solved? So, you know, in the Soto school, they pointed more on the
kind of steps.
Yes, on the steps of the path, the process, on the elevation. In the Windsor school, they pointed to the sudden stroke. And also, I mean, Papaji was definitely, in his approach, I would say, he was more on this side, you know. I'm not on either side. I realize that, you know, really the approach is a paradox, and whoever once tries to solve this paradox is mistaken. And there is no contradiction. Contradiction is, of course, only the result of the mind attempt to solve a problem that cannot be solved between the relative and the absolute. So even my answer to people, you know, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said the only aim for people is enlightenment. Now I would answer in a more differentiated way. I would say, yes, the true aim, the source and the aim for people is awakening to the self, realizing the self, and allowing the unfoldment of the highest divine human potential possible. See, this is the process in the relative. Enlightenment has nothing to do with sitting there, and sitting back, and it's not an end. Enlightenment is not an end. It's not an end of a relative process, So in the school, people have to learn the difference between searching and learning, And when Papaji said call off the search, people understand call off learning. This is not what he said. But Papaji's approach, it did not, like all the Indian masters, they don't integrate so much, the process of what I call human elevation to highest intelligence. And this, of course, means that the effort does not end. But it is a paradox. It's as if something that is already whole is striving to the highest realization or the highest emanation of what is whole. It's a paradox. I call this the marriage of the philosophy of being with the philosophy of becoming. These are two different streams. And my understanding is that the highest possible, if we want to call it state, is this marriage, and not the merging, the absolute. This is not the highest possible state, and you can see it in the 10 pictures of riding the ox. First, it were only, I think, 8.
I think you have a very particular way of looking at all this, actually. I haven't really met it in any other interview. I mean, you've got, some kind of very unique Western filter, or something like a filter, the way you look. And I found that coming through the interview several times, and I think it will make it a very nice interview, actually.
Well, I believe, that I see that in the spiritual realm, the Eastern and the Western Hemisphere, we present the two parts that form the great paradox. Actually, that is also shown in the yin and yang symbol and in all the great cosmological symbols. They all show the same. And the Eastern approach is not complete. It's not complete. Mm-hmm. The Western approach is not complete. It's not complete, There has to happen, there has to be a marriage. And a marriage is a marriage between two approaches that don't seem in any way, they seem contradictory. It seems that they cannot merge, they cannot form one. They seem to exclude each other. And we can only realize this unique marriage if we go beyond this linear thinking approach that tries to separate and that tries to, follow one or the other. We might have different entrance gates, but to realize the highest, we have to give every contradictory approach, give every inner contradiction up, and meet in a no-mind way, and observe this great.
We had a wonderful example of that actually in this last meeting with Jahr. There was an executive from Australia, a very nice woman, probably 55 years old, came and sat in front of him and had her question. I can't remember really the question, but it was like a perfectly nice question, and she was probably hoping for a perfectly nice answer. But then actually what happened was that he challenged her. And he said, you know, are you really interested in the answer to this question? Is that really your interest? And of course, she hadn't quite understood the trap that was about to spring. So she said, of course, yes, yes. Then he said, well, have you an airline ticket? Yes, I've got an airline ticket. Are you ready to tear up your airline ticket? Bit of shock. And then basically he challenged her to tear up her ticket and stay in his ashram. And then he would answer her question, you see. So somehow, I don't know if that's for you a good example, but for me, that's an example where this thing happens, yeah? Because this was completely out of any possibility for her. And in the next meeting, the next day, she sat in the furthest corner, right in the back, hoping that he wouldn't notice her. But of course, it didn't work like that. So the first thing that happened was, where's that woman, you know? So, I mean, I find this play is very profound in the end, yeah? And it's, I think, an example of what you're talking about. It brings these two streams together somehow. Thank you.
All the best for your project.
Thank you.
Thank you.